Jackson's switching us back.
Yep.
Okay.
We are going to start
Camera
all over again. Oh, and we'll cut this out, this previous part. Okay, I'm starting again, and this is BJ LaCrone, and I work for Loudon Wildlife Conservancy, and I volunteer there too. And I've been working for months with Donna Lease and a good bit with Diane Rogers to establish some events at Lansdowne Woods. So many of the slides, all the slides pertain to anybody, but at the end we do have some pictures of the community there, targeting them. Since we're all in our homes and we need to embrace the internet and learn via the internet. I'm enjoying that part myself right now, in addition to planting a lot. You should send us your information at info@loudonwildlife.org so we can get your email and contact information to send you a post-event email. There's a lot of good information that's going to come from that, so please do share your information and we'll put it in and send that to you. Within that, we were planning on having a drawing for about 7 plants to people that are at Lansdowne Woods, and we will get that information out to people via that email. Too much going on here to worry about drawing here, so we'll do that. And then the future events I wanted to mention, besides this, we were going to have a native bee talk, raptor event with Secret Garden of Bees eventually, and a tree talk with Kyle Dingus. So we hope to get back to that point and enjoy those live in the future. So you can take a break at any time. This recording will be available later for you to enjoy. And so I'm going to pass it over to Julie, the president of Loudon Wildlife Conservancy.
Hi, I'm Julie. I'm outside working in the dirt, which I know is probably a not very nice thing to say to everybody who's stuck inside right now, but if you can get some fresh air, please do that. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to Landscape for Life. You've got a really great program in store for you. And this is brought to you by Loudon Wildlife Conservancy, and we are a member-based organization. So if you're not a member of Loudon Wildlife, check us out at loudonwildlife.org. We do lots of great education things like Landscape for Life. We do programs, we do some advocacy with local government. So we do so much in the community that your support is so essential to what we do. So enjoy the next hour or so. You guys have got a great program in store for you. And I'm going to get back to planting. So have a great time. Good luck.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, and I also want to mention, if you're already a member of Loudon Wildlife, we'd love to know about it. You can tell us in the chat box. So, to delve into Landscape for Life. Landscape for Life is a program originally put together by the U.S. Botanic Garden and the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And here we're offering it in conjunction with Loudon Wildlife. Okay, so and this is a program on sustainable gardening that we were going to offer at Lansdowne Woods Community, but of course now we're offering it live streaming, but it's open to anybody. Anybody can learn some good ideas for sustainable landscaping here, and then but we have specific slides at the end for the Lansdowne Woods Community. Okay, so here's Loudon Wildlife. And here's my yard. I'm Nan McCary. This is BJ LaCrone's yard. She's my co-presenter. So I've gone with trees and she's gone with meadow, and we're both really into converting our lawn to something else, something that's more sustainable, does more for wildlife, and is just more functional than a lawn. And in fact, we'll learn the term ecosystem services today. We're both, and both of these are providing more ecosystem services than a lawn does. And both of us grew up in Loudoun County, BJ and me, and on the left actually is my childhood home, which was bulldozed a few years ago, and now what's on the right kind of sits there. So we really know what it's like to have that mourning that we have over landscapes that we've lost, and I think this is something at all scales that we all feel, and then in terms of the environment, we feel like environmental problems are big and there's, we're not sure what we can do about all of them and overwhelming. But that's one thing that's really cool about Landscape for Life, because you can make a difference starting right where you are. In your own yard, your own balcony, your own community, you can have an effect on, and little things really do make a difference, and you can start small. So what is sustainability? That might be something you're wondering, and there's any number of definitions of sustainability, but basically it's using wisely today so as to leave resources for tomorrow. I also think of it as keeping resources in a cycle, because in nature that's what happens. Everything in nature that's a waste product ends up being food for somebody else. And the more we can kind of think about cycles and keeping things in a cycle on our yards and in our landscaping and even in our homes, the way we use items in our home, that is sustainability. When it comes to a sustainable garden, that would be a garden that exhibits these qualities of keeping things in a cycle and also providing for the future as well as the present. So not using up our resources, but instead fostering more of keeping our resources. And a really good concept to think about sustainability is from the concept of ecosystem services. So while we're thinking about not using up our resources and having them there available for the future, we want to think about the ecosystem services that nature provides. So nature provides us ecosystem services, and it's the stuff nature does for us for free. So some of us think this way all the time, and then to some of us it may be a new concept, but nature does stuff like clean our water for us if we just kind of create the right conditions to let nature do that, and then that's cheaper than us having to go back with other infrastructure and fix these problems over time. Another term that's used by Loudon Wildlife is green infrastructure. That's very similar to the ecosystem services concept. So in these slides we're going to go through what ecosystem services are, some of them, and then we're going to think about how we can help nature foster ecosystem services rather than the way we've been doing it for years, which is sort of that the way we landscape impedes nature's ability to provide ecosystem services. So one ecosystem service is capturing and cleaning water, because we want water to slow down and sink into the soil, and the soil will actually clean the water rather than having the water run off over the surface, which is what we see so much, especially in our more developed communities. Another one is that nature controls erosion and sediment runoff through roots and other vegetation. Another ecosystem service is building healthy and fertile soil. So I couldn't resist this picture. I love seeing this in the woods. I'm sure many of you do too. You see a fallen log and you see the progression over time of it being turned back into soil. I just love that. And that's kind of the way we want to think about how we want to build good soil in our lands where we landscape too. Now this is something beyond what we can do, but we want to keep that as an idea. Another ecosystem service is the providing of clean air and sequestering carbon. So trees perform a lot of great services for us, such as this. And you can go to this iTree site, and they have a tree benefit calculator. And so it can tell you about the services, the ecosystem services basically that a tree can provide, because it can take pollutants out of the atmosphere, it can sequester carbon and get it back down into the ground, which is where we want our carbon to be. And very similar to that, an ecosystem service is mitigating the urban heat island. So we know that the more asphalt and non-vegetative areas we have, the hotter it gets, and of course cities are kind of trying to combat this with planting trees and things like that. So that's another ecosystem service. Supporting human health and well-being is also a very important ecosystem service that nature's providing to us, and we are all familiar, I think, with studies that show that we do better cognitively and psychologically, both children and adults, when we are exposed to nature. And this is something Loudon Wildlife likes to work on. We have a children, actually I'm going to ask BJ, what's the exact name of that?
Youth and family program has come about. That's very well led by Megan Goldman.
Okay, and then you
Yeah.
had a specific one that was, the children, what were they doing? I don't know.
Yeah, they're meeting.
The mud or
Yeah,
something?
the Mud Club.
Mud Club, I love
Mud
it.
Club, they're meeting at the gatehouse when we get back to normal. We
Okay.
had a great time doing that. Lots of attention to that right now.
And then adults can do forest bathing, so that's another one. Okay, and a really important ecosystem service is providing habitat, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit today. So here we see, of course, our milkweed with a bee. Now we're going to talk about the unsustainable practices, which are sort of the status quo of what we've been doing over the decades, versus the more sustainable practices we could be doing in our landscaping. Okay, starting off with soil. So in an unsustainable landscape, the soil is often compacted by equipment and overuse. And in a sustainable landscape, we like to think of soil as a living, healthy ecosystem. So soil is a living substance, and it's fed by leaves and other organic matter, both living and dead organic matter. It goes into a cycle. So there's an underground food web, just like the above ground food web. And at all levels, they're feeding, the organic matter is feeding the critters, and then those critters are actually keeping those nutrients in their bodies that are available for your plants. So we really want to take our soil seriously. One of the really exciting little parts of the underground food web that scientists have only learned about for the last 30 years or so is called mycorrhiza. So I'm interested to know how many people already know about this concept, because it's become it's gotten out into the popular press quite a bit. And if you haven't heard of it, it's one of those things where you'll probably run across it all the time now. But you can Google it, or we can put up a link for you to learn more about the underground network of fungi and trees. It's a symbiotic network, meaning that they both benefit from this partnership. So that's a really fun thing to look into. In an unsustainable landscape, we take the garden clippings off the land and we put them in landfill, and we know our landfills already are overburdened. So once again, we want to think about keeping things in a cycle. We want to see how we can keep our clippings on our properties and use them to support the soil food web, because you're always wanting to be feeding that soil food web. In an unsustainable landscape, instead, we use industrially produced fertilizers to support our plants. And in a sustainable landscape, we're using that soil food web, and we're planting plants that are adapted to the area, native plants, and then we don't need those fertilizers. And we'll talk a little bit more about how fertilizers are actually a huge pollutant in our waterways. So the answer to most soil problems is add organic matter. Some of us have very compacted soils, and I know this, and it's a really hard thing to deal with. This is one source of organic matter that, best case scenario is you've got it on your property and you can chop things up and use that right there. Second best is you can buy leaf mulch at various places. Actually, Abernathy and Spencer in Lincoln, Virginia has it. You can buy it in bulk if you have a truck, and you can also buy bags of it. And it's excellent organic matter, and it really feeds those microbes, which is what we want to be doing. And we also want to keep the soil covered so that it's not subject to erosion, and it keeps the soil cooler and all of those things. And then we have living organic matter that's supporting our soil, so in terms of deep-rooted plants. And then when these roots die, of course, they form another part of the dead organic matter that's feeding our microbes. This, of course, is a picture of Midwestern soil. This was a display at the U.S. Botanic Garden a couple of years ago, and I just love it. And of course, they have really magnificent soil there. But anyway, it's showing you some of the deep-rooted plants. And some of these plants we also can buy around here. These are also native plants that we can purchase to put into our yards and try to have deeper roots. Okay, and referring to water, in an unsustainable landscape, we treat stormwater as a waste product to get it off the property. More recently, we're thinking about water as a resource. So water is a resource and you want to keep it on your site and have it available for your plants. And so we have things like these swales and things. We know that we have a lot of flooding these days from our big storms. And, you know, this happens, these big floods happen because of many, many, many little rivulets feeding into bigger streams and then rivers and then eventually the Chesapeake Bay. So really, if everybody did their part to lower what we call the impervious surface, impervious means you can't pass through. So anytime we put up a surface like asphalt or a compacted lawn, that means that water's not sinking in to the soil, which is what we want. Instead, it's running over the top and we get this. Now here's an example from Landscape for Life of the different land uses and how that impacts how much of a rainfall event gets into your soil. So on the far left, you see woods and also meadow. They function about the same here. About if you had a 3-inch rain, about ½ an inch is running off the top, and 2.5 inches is sinking into the soil, which is what we want because that's where that water can remain and get clean. Now in the middle we have row crop agriculture, not particularly great at letting water infiltrate, and because 1 inch is now running off of the top. When we get to suburban landscapes, we have about 1.5 inches running off the top. This is the fourth one in the series here that we're looking at, and then about another 1.5 is still sinking into the soil. Now when we get to urban areas, most of it runs off the top and very little of the water from a 3-inch rain event is sinking into the soil. And cities, of course, are trying to do things about that, providing more green infrastructure. Just to tell you a little bit more about some of Loudon Wildlife stuff that goes along with this is we have a stream monitoring program, and that's where you can go out and look at how healthy the streams are. We also have we are also gonna come up again with our frog monitoring, our amphibian monitoring program. So these are ways that you can do citizen science, which is that you can get out there and collect data that is actually used by real scientists. And these are some of the programs that we can do through Loudon Wildlife. We want to think about animal waste in terms of clean water. You need to pick up after your dog. As Chris Van Vlack from the Soil and Water Conservation District says, we didn't know this way back when, and it was sort of like we didn't know we had to wear bicycle helmets, but now we know we have to wear bicycle helmets, and now we know we have to pick up after our dogs. And of course there's also more development and more people, so there's we do find that animal waste is a significant pollutant in our streams. Okay, and this all leads down to the Chesapeake Bay. All of this stuff coming off of our lawns and our properties and our roofs eventually goes to the Chesapeake Bay, and let's see if this is going to work. This is showing what happens after a rain event and how much more the siltation that happens. Now, of course, that's from agriculture, and that's also, though, from running off of our lawns. And we have a dead zone in the Chesapeake, which you may have heard about. Now, the dead zone, I've highlighted here in yellow some of the causes, and it's the excess sediment and then the nutrients, which are nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen and phosphorus are in our fertilizers. So they are nutrients because they're good for plants in the right quantities, but when you put them on the top of the soil and they're not sinking in, they're just running off the top, and then they cause eutrophication in the Chesapeake Bay, and they cause these dead zones, and it's actually a huge problem. And it's something that agriculture and I think homeowners have to both address, is our excess use of fertilizer. And for lawns, we're just kind of putting it there for no particular reason except to grow more grass and then mow more grass, and there's not even a crop really ever developed from it. So that's a real biggie. If you can think about the fertilizer use and how to lessen fertilizer use, and do you need it at all, is another question. One study estimated that turf grass is our 4th largest irrigated crop in the country, and the biggest crop in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So we're calling it an irrigated crop, but once again, it's not really producing anything except more grass clippings. This just shows the difference in some of our nice deeply rooted plants, which are going to hold our soil in place and therefore create porous spaces for the water to sink in. And on the far left, we have Kentucky bluegrass. And so what you can see is it's mown real short, and therefore the roots are really short. That influences how deeply the roots go. So you can see they're not performing any ecosystem services there at all, those roots. It's very, very shallow. Some of our other plants have deep roots and can really do a good job at holding our soil in place. So we want to think about that. We want to think about other things, taking parts of our lawns and making them into other areas that we could plant a more complex plant community on. Okay, and then getting to water, managing stormwater. We have rain gardens and bioswales, very similar concept. These are all ways to just have the water slow down and sink into the soil. This is a rain garden. That's one way to do it, and you can either try to do it. Actually, I did this myself. It's probably good to get professional help or follow some directions. But mine functions okay. It certainly collects a lot of water coming off of the asphalt, which is a really good thing. Here's a great community rain garden system. So as you can see here, this rain garden is collecting from the lawn. So it's collecting water that's running over the lawn. However, you can see where the curb is cut out there. It's also collecting from the road. And this is huge because a lot of our pollutants are road salts and are things that come off of our cars and, leaking oil and everything else. If we can keep those things out of our waterways and out of our bay, that's really good. And that's what this community in Minnesota did, is a series of these rain gardens to really clean their water by filtering it all through rain gardens. Here's something that was done in Loudoun County by John McGee. This is Tippecanoe Lake. Yes, Tippecanoe Lake. And this wonderful assemblage of native plants was planted around this lake, and that's a wonderful thing for many, many reasons. It's providing habitat. It serves as a riparian buffer, meaning that this vegetation slows water down that's falling and lets it drip more slowly down to the soil surface. And then also there are roots that are holding the soil in place and allowing the water to seep in. It also serves to keep the Canada geese from going in and out, and their poop actually also causes a lot of nitrogen, which is one of our, as you know, our nutrients that can pollute. So there's many wonderful reasons to do something like this. It looks a little wilder than maybe we used to be used to, and we have some Ansonia here and some
ironweed.
Yeah, ironweed and
Buttonbush is in there.
Oh, thank you.
Goldenrod.
Yeah, great. Okay. And here's another picture of that. Here you can see the Joe Pye weed that he put in and the ironweed, which is the purple one. So that's a really good thing to do around waterways at a community level effort. So in general, in an unsustainable landscape, we think about the plant we want to plant, and then we try to take the landscape and match it to the plant. And the more forward thinking way now is think about the site that you have and then go out and choose plants that are adapted to the conditions of your site. Okay, now providing habitat. This is a big ecosystem service. This is really important. Okay, we used to like to see our leaves looking perfect, right? We didn't want to see them nibbled at like this one is here by this little saddleback moth caterpillar. But what we find is that this is actually a really important ecosystem function that's going on here that we will talk about. And we often think about providing habitat in terms of pollinators, and that's really important, and we'll talk about that too. And here's one of our milkweed feeding our monarch. But what we want to talk about now is our native host plants and caterpillars in particular, and they're the ones that are nibbling those edges. So you can see here, this is actually at BJ's yard. So tell me again what this caterpillar is.
That's a skipper caterpillar, and I specifically bought this indigo bush to support that cute little thing there. And so when I brought it home, they eventually ate all the leaves and turned into their little chrysalises before they became a skipper butterfly.
And she knows those leaves are coming back next year. That's the thing. It's not dead. It actually fed someone, and now she's got the chrysalises. So those little places at the edge where they're eating, this is a really important concept. So this is a concept that Doug Tallamy has shared widely with the world. He actually has a new book. His first book was called Bringing Nature Home. And he explained that what goes on is that nobody wants to be eaten. Plants don't want to be eaten. Therefore, plants produce toxins in their leaves. And over evolutionary time, though, the caterpillars that have evolved with those plants have adapted to those toxins, and so certain caterpillars are adapted to eat certain plants. And this is where when we bring in, when the nursery trade brings in only plants from Asia, then we're not supporting this relationship, and that's what we did for decades. We brought in plants from Asia in the landscape industry. But what we really want to think about now is bringing back native plants into our landscapes, because those are the ones that feed the caterpillars. And caterpillars are wonderful in their own right, and butterflies and moths are of course wonderful to see in our landscape. There's another important component to this that Doug Tallamy pointed out, which is that our birds need to feed these caterpillars to their young. And that's because caterpillars are nice and they slip down the gullet really easily. So baby birds can't eat things like berries. If you want to support wildlife like birds, you need to support the entire life cycle, and that means supporting the breeding pair and the young. And as Doug Tallamy pointed out in a rather famous newspaper article, chickadee parents need to feed their young over 350 caterpillars per day. And since caterpillars need to eat the plants they've co-evolved with, if you want to see baby birds and birds in your landscape, you need to plant native plants that will feed those caterpillars. In general, insects are the basis of our entire food web. So you can see that in this graphic. Plants are the primary producers because they produce they take from the sun, and they are the primary producers. But the first line of consumers are the insects, and that's a very important level that we haven't often thought about, and the insects are the ones that basically take that energy and disperse it into the rest of the food web. So let's think about ecosystem services of plants. I'm just going to read this that Doug Tallamy wrote in his article called The Chickadee's Guide to Gardening. This was in the New York Times a couple years ago. So plants allow us and nearly every other species to eat sunlight. And they also produce oxygen, build topsoil and hold it in place, prevent floods, sequester carbon dioxide, buffer extreme weather, and clean our water. So Talamy points out that you might think that we would value plants for what they do, for their functions, but many of us still only think of them as how they look. So if we can think more about plants in that way, and if we can plant more plants and reduce plant blindness, that's a step forward. Okay, just a little bit about our native pollinators. Here's mountain mint, wonderful, wonderful plant for feeding many of our pollinators, many of our native bees that we're going to talk about. And here we go. So when we think of pollinators, we want to realize there's an array of pollinators of different kinds, not just our butterflies and our bees. And so we have ants, and we have flies that look like bees but are actually flies, but they can be doing pollinating. We have bees and wasps and beetles. There's the lightning bug beetle. And we want to think about all these guys because they're all doing pollination for us, and there's tons of different kinds of native bees. So just a little bit about native bees. So many of us are aware of honeybees, and honeybees are great. They're part of our agricultural system, sort of the industrial agricultural system, and they produce honey. And but however, there are 400 native bees just in Virginia and 4,000 in the United States, and many of them are endangered. And these native bees are very important, and they do a lot of our pollinating. So they even do a lot of the pollinating of our crops. And BJ will at the end has a graphic she's going to show you that shows how even if you're just interested in vegetable gardening, you might want to plant some of these native plants around, because the native bees need something to eat the rest of the time when they're not pollinating your crops. And some of our native bees are more efficient than our honeybees at pollinating our crops, such as tomato and squash, which is pollinated by the squash bee, which is a native bee, because the honeybees came over from Europe with the colonists. So that's very recent. So all of these plants had to be pollinated all the millennia before that by someone else, and that was our native bees. So it's really important to support our native bees. We're going to have a talk just on native bees, isn't that right?
It's supposed to June 20th.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully by then it'll be in person, but
if not, we'll work on a Zoom session or something.
Yeah.
And that's a mason bee.
Thank you. Good point. Yes, BJ's pointing out this is a mason bee, one of our bees that we're trying to support. Very important for our orchards. When you're planting for bees, actually, you want to think about early and late blooming flowers, because bees can be around from March through November, and they need something to eat that entire time. And so bluebells are one, as we see here. Redbuds are an early bloomer that supports early native bees that come out early. And in the fall, we have our wonderful array of asters, lots of kinds of asters, such as in this photo, and our goldenrods. And anything else for fall I can think of? It's the asters and the goldenrods are really...
Mostly.
Yeah. In general, I don't know if you've heard this in the news, but there's a lot of concern about our insects in general, and sort of the collapse of the insects. And as you remember from that graphic, the insects are the basis of the entire food web. So this is something where it's not just an esoteric concern, it actually affects us individually to make sure we have our insects out there as the basis of the food web. Lepidoptera means our butterflies and moths, so that's showing the decline of them, and then the other shows the decline of all of them. So here's a book that is a nice starter book for native plants, and it's by Plant Nova Natives. You can buy this in various places. You can also get it online, and we'll give you a link to that. It's really nice, lots of beautiful pictures, and kind of, if you don't know where to begin with native plants, it can kind of give you some ideas of some fun ones to start with. And here's another great way to get started. Loudon Wildlife Conservancy put together their Super 9 And so these are the 9 plants, and it tells you which insects they support. So we'll put links to that too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And here's a picture of Julie Borneman at her nursery. So this is one of the local nurseries that you could shop at. It's in Hamilton, Virginia. Make sure you, wherever you go, try to ask for native plants and try to avoid buying invasive plants. We'll tell you about that.
And even when you go to Meadows Farms or other Lowe's, Home Depot, start expecting more from them. Yeah.
Thanks, yeah. Most of the time, Loudon Wildlife Conservancy has a program through Audubon at Home of Northern Virginia. And it's a program where they'll come to your yard and help you get started with native plants, maybe point out what invasive plants you might have. It's a really great way to get started, and then you can be certified if you can find 10 of the important animals on their list, many of them bees and butterflies and birds and things like that. And snakes are good.
And at Lansdowne Woods, we could come work with your team to eventually certify your property too. That would be good. And the reason we ask for that is that the more we certify them and present to the public that this is another, 20-acre place that offers ecosystem services,
Yeah.
then that's making a statement there.
Yeah, you get a big bang for your buck when you
Yeah.
do a larger property like that. Yeah, that would be really exciting. So right now that is on hiatus like everything else,
Yeah.
but you can still find out more information about it if you'd like. In general, biodiversity is good for human health. On the large scale, I don't know if you've seen these books or there's a video I'd like to post a link to. On a large scale, our increased vulnerability to epidemics is partly because of rapid landscape change and land use change. Now, this is a worldwide problem, of course, but there is a link there that scientists have found. On a more small scale, this picture just is actually pointing out that the more different little critters we have in the landscape, like the less likely you are to have things like Lyme disease, because you have different critters that can either eat the ticks or are not good hosts for the ticks. The very best host for the tick is that little white-footed mouse in the picture, in the graphic, and you want to make sure that you have a diverse assemblage of animals in your landscape, because then there's fewer white-footed mice, and those are the ones that the ticks get their meal from when they get the bacterium that causes Lyme disease. So of course a snake is in there. They're really good in the landscape. But here's our best friend for fighting Lyme disease. The Carey Institute calls him the unsung heroes in the Lyme disease epidemic, and that's because they can eat up to 90% of the ticks that get on them, and then they also are not good reservoirs for the Lyme disease bacterium. So possums are really important, and there's an organization just to support possums. So we get really sad anymore when we see a dead possum in the road. So think what you can do to support your possums and not opossums and not kill them. Okay, another aspect that we want to talk about is that in an unsustainable landscape we have invasive plants. So invasive plants is a big problem, and this is not just weeds in your yard. These are things that escape from your yard and get into our natural areas, into our national parks and our forests. And so we really have to make a concerted effort not to buy any more of these native plants and to try to take them out of our own properties when we can. Now, if you have a large property, that can be a challenge, but we can tell you what some of them are, and then some resources. So here on the top left, the pretty flowering tree is Bradford pear. So they're all over the place right now. Actually, this is peak Bradford pear season. They come out earlier than our native flowering trees do, most of them. They're a big problem in the landscape, and of course they were planted in everybody's yard, and now they're just taking over. Once you realize it's Bradford pear, you realize they're really taking over the roadsides and the forests and the open areas.
I recently posted a Facebook post on that and got a huge response of people understanding the problem there.
Oh,
If
good.
you drive to Tuscarora High School in Leesburg, you can see a very bad example of what's happened there with Bradford pear.
And it becomes a monoculture of that one species, and that's never good in nature. We don't want monoculture, we want biodiversity. But invasive plants create a monoculture of only that one plant because they're just so successful. Then we have, so in the middle there we have Oriental Bittersweet. Top right we have Burning Bush. These are all invasive plants. Lower right we have Autumn Olive. And right there in the center bottom, we have English Ivy. And then on the lower left, we have, I always forget the name. No, it's the prickly one. It's the one that they think harbors the animals.
Japanese barberry.
Yeah, Japanese barberry. There's some connection actually to increased tick activity and having Japanese barberry. A lot of people, Japanese barberry is in our yards, landscapers plant it, and once you know the plant, you see it out in nature when you take walks in nature, so you know it's escaping from yards out into nature and taking over areas. The problem is these take over areas where native plants can no longer thrive. There's two really good resources on invasive plants. These are both books and also online sources that we'll have in the material that we link for you. You want to think in terms of building in layers or planting in layers, because here's an example of different birds, for example, need different layers in the forest to complete their life cycle. Again, getting away from uniformity is the way of nature. We want to think in terms of corridors. So wildlife needs larger areas to migrate through. So as much as you can think about your planting linking up to either other plantings like forests or even neighborhoods could get together. This isn't really important for the migration of wildlife. It's also important for having larger gene pools. And larger gene pools, it's always good to have a larger gene pool in terms of being resistant to disease threats. So now I'm going to turn it over to BJ, and she's going to tell you about some things you can do at Lansdowne Woods.
First off, I just wanted to go straight to our project that was a couple years ago. September 2018, we were awarded a Burke grant for $1,500 at the Ashburn Methodist Church. And if you can drive over in there and take a look at yourself, it's close by. But we were allowed to plant going from lawn, looking like this, doing practically nothing for nature. And then in September of 2018, we planted, and then in June of 2019, this is what we had from that. And then in July, it looked like that.
BJ's not taking enough credit for this. She was the instrumental person for getting the grant and designing this garden and getting everybody motivated, and she does a lot of work on it.
And we were lucky to line up Dominion Power. They actually came over in one day, dug up the grass, and helped us put it all in one day. So we were very, very fortunate to have that community service from that group. Now with Lansdowne Woods, you will have your, I guess, awarded contract for a very good landscaper now that can turn some of your grassy areas into things like this. And so when I walk in Lansdowne Woods, this is like one of the prime examples of let's turn this into native plants. There's a lot of non-native grasses. I'm not sure there's anything native in there exactly, so I turned to Willisford Conservancy, and why not turn it into a native plant demonstration garden, or just start, planting, groups of 5, 7, 9 types of plants, and then identify them to the public and to your residents there. They've done a great job at Willisford. You could organize a group to go over there and see what they've done. I highly recommend that. And then we walked around back, Nan and I did the other day when we were meeting with Donalise, and we're like, oh, the woods are great, there's native trees there, there's some invasives there, but look at the runoff from the grass there. I mean, the woods are slowing the water down, but the river is down below. Why not plant some native plants there to relieve the runoff? Look how beautiful that looks there with Joe Pye weed and black-eyed Susans and other things like that can turn it from just grass to that. And then we walked a little further, and this beautiful little stream was there, and that is providing a great catchment area for cleaning the soil. And then you see the frog eggs on the left.
Yeah, those are probably wood frog eggs that we found about a month ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was pretty exciting. That means your water's fairly clean there.
Right. And there were non-natives there. Just kind of work with your landscaper to transition that to more natives to make it even better. And you can see more runoff from the top. You could put more native plants up above to decrease the runoff. Lots of opportunities there in your planting. And then we went around to the patios that people are fortunate enough to have there. And I have to say, there's a lot of Nandina everywhere there. That's a very bad bush to have. It's beautiful with the red berries, but unfortunately, if a bird eats too many of them, then they could die because there's cyanide in the berries. So you could have ideas from this townhouse area of one of our volunteers. You could transition some of your areas there with native plants. And then you could have container gardens. The one on the right is mine. I have at my home to experiment. Jasmine is a vine, and coneflower and asters there. Or our executive director, when he moved to the area, he bought a lot of containers and just worked with people and put native plants there. So you go from what's there, hardly nothing at the beginning of the season in the center, and it turned into just a huge pollinator area that he had on his back deck. And now this year, I went to visit him the other day, and everything is coming back. It's just growing, and it's pretty amazing what's coming next. So you can do that at Lansdowne Woods too, or anywhere. Oh, and what I was going to say, what I was going to say is that we could have a connection that can help get container gardens to you if you needed it. We're working with someone, so if you are interested, we can arrange containers, plants, the soil, and bring it to you when things get better. So please do email us if you're interested in that. We would like to help. Okay, then we walked around to the vegetable gardens that are back there that people are lucky enough to plant in, and realize that you can increase native plants there too that will help bring more happy pollinators to your vegetables. We recently ran across a really good link that I can send to you that gets into this here. And then specifically talks about the benefits. You have at the bottom, it has tomatoes and the types of bees that are needed for those and helps. And then the companion plant on the right of native plants that can bring more bees, make them happier, and help with your pollination of your vegetables. And berries we have listed up above. But we have a really great couple links to send you on that came from Plant Nova Natives. And then I wanted to point out a couple things that I thought were exciting that I learned a few years ago that parsley, dill, fennel, some people don't know that they are host plants for the black swallowtail. So when you see these little cute caterpillars eating them, that's a great thing. You will get the black swallowtail. And then I know everybody hates the tomato hornworm. I don't hate them anymore. I try to share if I can, because they really do turn into a pollinator sphinx moth that's similar to the clear wing moth. That you can see them flying around toward dusk and pollinating plants. It's quite the sight. And also, I learned from Doug telling me that cardinals love the tomato hornworm. So hopefully they can eat some of those to get rid of them for you. And then finally, we just come back to what can I do to help? So we'll kind of recap that. When you're working with your landscaper, I think you've got a good one now that's come on board. He's more aware. Don't buy invasive plants. Really think about what you're putting there that is native. I think they'll be realizing the need to reduce fertilizer. And I've heard that you're doing some soil testing first, so hopefully they're not just applying. And if you have less grass, then you'll need less fertilizer if you're going to plant more native butterfly gardens. And I've heard that is his plan to do. If Jason's on the call, hi Jason. Okay. So like I said, reducing lawn size and putting in more pollinator gardens. And then again, planting natives in your garden plots to help what you have already. And then leaving bare soil, just realizing that if you have bare soil that you're going to help the native bees, you don't have to cover up everything. And then leave more leaves. You've got that covered in the back there with the woods, but don't get so upset that every single leaf has to be non-existent on your property. And that's pretty much it.
So there were a couple chats that maybe we'll go ahead
Okay.
and you had addressed them individually, but let's see. Somebody had said, "Did you say indigo bush?"
Yeah.
And yes, that is the plant you had.
Can you go back to the And so with that, I mentioned earlier, this is our recent publication, Planting for Wildlife. So if you were to refer to this, and there's others online, but this is very, very enlightening. I'm not sure you can see it, but there's a column with wildlife benefits that tells you what you're doing when you plant that plant. I use it all the time.
Yeah, so if anybody else quickly had any chat comments, maybe we could answer questions that way, I think. Somebody else had said, "I'd like to figure out if the mountain mint I have is native to my area." So BJ had answered, "Perhaps you can bring a piece by Watermark Woods to socially distance, review, and match." I think most of our mountain, we have to ask Julie if there's a lot of mountain mints that are native to this area. Mountain mint is not like our culinary mints, so which are not native. That's specifically just for eating, but we also know they spread like wildfire and really take over. Mountain mint is a nice spreader, but it's not going to be like your like the mints that we might plant for eating.
And when you see it grow, and in the summer, the amount of pollinators that are on the different kinds of mountain mints is just amazing.
Yeah. So does anybody else have any questions via chat that we will try to answer?
Well, we're kind of sorry to go because we love what we do.
Yeah.
And we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. So we look forward to seeing you in person someday soon.